Hey everybody, welcome to the webinar. We're going to be talking about hail season survival strategies for tracker-mounted solar power projects. And I see we are having some more people join. So let's just give it a moment. Let's see, it looks like we are up to about 18 people. Great, welcome everyone. Okay, great, welcome. My name is John Previtali, and I'm joined by Nicole Thompson. And I want to mention that we are going to be taking questions throughout the presentation. And so you can use the Teams interface to send us questions, and we'll do our best to answer them as we're talking. So it looks like we have about 25 people, 26. Some people are still joining, so let's just give it a couple more minutes. Everyone's doing well today. I'm in Houston. It's here for RE Plus Texas. Stayed an extra day, so I could do this in the morning. Great. We've got 30 people. Okay, good. It looks like the people joining have died down to about 30 people. Okay, great. All right, well, let's get going. As I mentioned, my name is John Previtali, and I work for VDE Americas, and I'm joined with Nicole Thompson, who is the Senior Manager for Data Science at KWH Analytics. All right, let's get going. Here we go. All right, so we're going to talk about, just briefly describe who KWH Analytics and VDE Americas are. We're going to talk about the VDE Hail Risk Intelligence for solar services that VDE Americas sells, and then we'll get into the heart of the matter, hail season survival strategies for tracker-mounted solar projects. And then we're going to talk about a new exciting tool that helps people demonstrate the effectiveness of their hail monitoring capabilities, the Hail Stow and Risk Evaluation Form that KWH Analytics and VDE collaborated on. And then we'll dedicate some time to Q&A. But as I mentioned, feel free to send questions as we go. All right, Nicole, do you want to talk about KWH Analytics?
Yeah, definitely. I can introduce KWH. Thanks, John. So we are a property insurance provider for renewable energy assets primarily. We started off primarily as a data company, which we kind of leveraged to inform our insurance products heavily. So on the property insurance side, we have over $100 billion worth of assets in our loss database. And so that gives us a really unique view into the types of losses the PV industry and the other renewables are seeing on the property insurance side. And this also includes null or zero loss events as well that we can learn from and leverage. And we are also developers of the REAL, or the Renewable Energy Adjusted Loss property model. And the impetus for this was really when we collected all of this loss data, we saw that the industry standard modeling assumptions that are typically used for sizing property insurance for the renewables industry, those industry standard models were underestimating the losses we were seeing when we looked at our loss database by around 300% or over 300% in some areas. So this really led to the need for our real model, or our adjusted model view that we could use for renewables. And as part of this, we've built out quite a few secondary modifiers as well. Sorry, excuse me, so that we can truly reward resilience. So these would be things like your module selection, your tracker selection, these very renewables or PV specific choices or design factors that should influence resilience, which I think we'll talk about a little bit more today. And we've also insured over $50 billion worth of renewable assets through our insurance products. So, yeah.
Great. Excellent. Thank you, Nicole. That's really impressive. All right. So now it's my turn. I'll talk briefly about VDE Americas. So we are a group of engineers who specialize in technical due diligence for mostly utility scale, but also community solar and CNI, rooftop, DG, distributed generation, solar power projects, and BESS projects, and combined solar power and BESS projects. And we've been operating in the United States since about 2013. And we're kind of like we're a small team, but we do a lot of volume. We have supported financing for over $15 billion of projects, PV and energy storage projects, which amount to over 250 projects. We do owner's engineering for banks like Wells Fargo and Capital One. And then we also do independent engineering for developers who are seeking financing. We do technology reviews for things like inverters and energy storage projects and PV modules, where we actually are starting to do technology reviews for perovskite PV modules and perovskite companies. It's super interesting. And finally, the reason we are talking today is we're also the solar power industry's leading hail risk assessment and mitigation service. So let me talk a little bit about that. So our hail risk and assessment and mitigation service really started about 5 years ago. I personally was still working at Wells Fargo. I was leading the technical due diligence for the tax equity group there. And around that time, we had the Midway hail loss, which was about a $70 million hail loss. And it caused the hail insurance market to harden. So basically premiums went up, sublimits went down, coverage went down, so the cost went up. Sublimits for hail, insurance coverage for hail went down. And then in some cases, projects couldn't get insurance because it wasn't available. So because there wasn't enough capacity or the insurance was just too expensive. And so what happened was at that time, this problem has been solved since that time at Wells Fargo, but at that time, we were left with a lot of projects, a few projects that were in hail-prone regions without hail insurance. And so I asked VDE Americas to look into what the real risk for hail was, the physical risk, the statistical risk of hail, and it turned out to be a very hard problem to solve. And but they did it, and they created a model which I'll talk about briefly. And since joining VDE Americas a few years ago, I now manage the team that does this hail risk modeling. And so some of the products that we sell are site and equipment, specific meteorological analysis, probable maximum loss, reports that are used for insurance quotes and understanding the risk of the probable maximum loss over like different time periods, like 500 years is a typical time period. Pro forma risk exposure, so you can understand what the risk of loss from hail is over a project's lifetime, both like the P50 median or average, and also the downside scenario. It's very useful for pro forma modeling. We have a set of maps, of ArcGIS maps, that we call the Hail Risk Atlas. So for people who don't want to get a report from us, which takes like a week to 2 weeks, they can very quickly look at a map like the one I'm showing here to understand the risk of hail in any particular area, both from a meteorological perspective and also from an economic perspective, like probable maximum loss, average annual loss. We advise people on how to optimize insurance coverage using a lot of those reports and tools that I just mentioned. We're able to do portfolio risk management. So basically understanding the risk of loss on the portfolio level for projects that are within 200 kilometers from each other. We're working on expanding that. And then we sell off-the-shelf hail monitoring and stow protocols, test protocols, and provide third-party validation services to make sure that hail monitoring and stow functionality is indeed working on projects. And then finally, we work with our sister company, the Renewable Energy Test Center, or RETC, based in Fremont, California, to create PV module hail resiliency curves using physical testing in the lab. So that gives us the ability to look at what the probability of glass failure is over a full range of naturally occurring hail conditions. And before I move on, I just want to focus on this map briefly. So what we're showing here is a comparative risk of hail. It's not noted here, but this is for a 45 millimeter or greater hailstorm. We start to see damage for PV modules at about naturally occurring hail sizes of about 45 millimeters or greater. And what we recommend is that for any projects that are within these zones that are, light orange to red, we recommend hail monitoring in stow, because that zone suggests that you're going to have at least one hailstorm with a hailstone diameter 45 millimeters or greater within 100 years. And 100 years is a long time, obviously, but this is not a perfect science, and the risk of damage is so great that we do, recommend that as I mentioned, that even if there's a risk of one of these large hailstorms within 100 years, you should deploy hail monitoring instead. It's well worth it. It's not super expensive compared to the risk of loss. All right, well, let's get into it. So this today we're talking about the hail season survival strategies for tracker-mounted solar power projects, and I'm going to go through basically a list of best practices that is taken from this technical memo that's available from our website that we co-published with our client Wells Fargo about a year ago now. And so this is free. Just come to our website. You can get it, and you'll see a lot more detail in this technical memo than what I'm going to talk about today. But I'm just going to talk about some high-level best practices. Let me just check to see if there are any questions. I don't see any. Feel free to ask any questions. So the first thing to do is to really understand the hail risk at your project location. So as I showed in the map earlier, it really varies across the United States quite a bit. And so it's important to really understand whether or not you need to worry about it from a meteorological perspective at a particular location. The other thing that is really important is understanding the PV module hail resiliency that you have on your project, or you will have on a future project. Not all, Nicole's going to talk about this, but not all PV modules have the same level of hail resilience. So and it really depends on the type of glass that the PV module uses. And then also, it's important to understand what the capabilities of your tracker are for hail stow. So some trackers are better at hail stow than others, and some are better at staying in hail stow at high wind speeds. And so it's important to understand what the maximum wind speed is during hail for a particular location, and ensure that the tracker can stay in hail stow at those high wind speeds. Number two, hail stow. Hail stow itself is the act of putting a tracker into a maximum tilt angle. And so it's important to understand what the estimated risk of loss is for your location, given the tracker's maximum stow angle, and given the risk of loss, the risk of hail at different sizes, maximum sizes at a particular location. So as people may know, different trackers have different maximum tilt angles that they go into for hail stow. We've got currently Array Technologies is 52 degrees. They did announce a 77-degree tilt project, tracker. And Next Trackers, another major tracker company, their default is 60 degrees. They also have a 75-degree product called Hail Pro. And then Game Change is another major company. They have 60-degree stow. And then there are others out there. There are many others out there that have different maximum tracker angles. But one thing to note is that not all trackers have the capability of maintaining that hail stow angle, that maximum tilt angle at high wind speeds. So many will go into wind stow at a relatively flat angle or zero tilt at wind speeds that are within the range that you would see during a hailstorm. And so you can't, it's risky to put them into hail stow at high wind speeds. So stow early, stow often. This is a phrase that I may have stolen from you, Nicole. And I know you're going to talk about that, but yeah, we definitely recommend to, for people to be conservative with regard to hail stow. If they think that hail is coming, just go ahead and put your trackers into hail stow. And we've talked to a number of clients who have this philosophy, and the question always arises: oh, are we going to lose a lot of energy production revenue? And I can tell you with I don't want to steal Nicole's thunder, but the answer is no. And one client said that their asset managers who monitor the weather adjusted energy production and revenue don't even notice that they're putting the trackers into hail stow early and often. Consider 3.2 millimeter front glass. I mentioned this before, that different PV modules have different hail resiliencies. So 3.2 millimeter front glass is about twice as hail resilient compared to 2 millimeter glass modules. And the reason that is because not just because 3.2 millimeter front glass is thicker, it's because under normal manufacturing, like mass production techniques, it can be fully heat tempered. So it's actually harder. 2 millimeter front glass is too thin to be fully heat tempered. It's called heat strengthened. And so it's just softer and it cracks more easily. So 3.2 millimeter front glass is really a better choice for hail preventions. That combined with hail stow, you really start to solve the problem entirely. Alerting is also a very important piece of the puzzle. So we recommend what we call multi-layer or redundant hail alerts or weather alerts. So you can set up regional alerting using data that is alerts that are sent out from the National Weather Service. That's incidentally free. And what they'll do is they'll send out a regional watch. So, for an area that usually encompasses several counties or a large portion of a state. And those watches will come out, the day before, hours before, many hours before. And so you can essentially prepare for a hailstorm coming in the next day or in a few hours. And then they'll announce a warning. And so this is the next stage after a watch. And so this is like a National Weather Service alert, really saying, hey, you are probably going to get hail. And they'll tell you, they'll also include information about wind speed and whatnot. It's not super accurate. Like, they won't give you like really accurate information. They're just going to say, hey, there's probably going to be large hail. There's probably going to be large wind in your county. So you should do something about it if you're in a susceptible position. And so that's when we recommend that people put their trackers into hail stow. You can put your trackers into hail stow during the watch time as well. If you're really conservative, there's nothing stopping you from doing that. That's great. But once you get a warning, put your trackers into hail stow. However, we also recommend, particularly for utility scale projects that can afford this in their own budgets, site-specific hail alerts from private weather service monitoring and alerting services. And these are companies like DTN, AccuWeather, InjuWatch, Visala. There are a few of them out there. We recommend you ask about their accuracy. We have done due diligence on DTN and can confirm that that is a very good hail monitoring service. But yeah, there are others, as I mentioned, out there. And so what we recommend is that you set up essentially like at least a 30-mile radius around the project boundaries. And what these hail monitoring service providers will do is they use these essentially like digitized maps to create these triangles, which I believe they call cones of uncertainty, which sort of move around, and they're like the vectors of these hailstorms moving around the map, if you can imagine that. And once these triangles, once the tip of the triangle or any portion of the triangle comes into that 30-mile radius around the project, it'll send you an alert. And you should definitely go into hailstow at that point, because that means that storm is very close. People ask why we chose a 30-mile radius for this, and it's because hailstorms can move as fast as 60 miles per hour. Usually they're moving around 30 miles per hour, but they can move as fast as 60 miles per hour. So we wanted to give people, at least a half hour to make sure that they get the trackers into hailstow. Because it's, sometimes they don't immediately go into hailstow. There may be some troubleshooting. Maybe we've seen situations where people don't have the logins for the control systems, right? For the tracker control system. So they have to get those. So just want to make sure you are well prepared and have enough time to put the trackers into hailstow. And speaking of hailstow, so it's so important to have fast and also redundant hailstow capabilities. We do recommend fully automated hailstow that's backed up by manual hailstow. There are a lot of companies, developers, and operators out there who don't want to rely on automatic hailstow, and that's a different approach. But they have to make sure that their staff is available, really like 24 hours to ensure that the projects can go into hailstow at any time. So we like the idea of an automated, automatically triggered hailstow that's backed up by manual hailstow. One thing that we are noticing is that not all projects actually have an on-site manual override capability, and so we feel like it is important for operators who are on-site as opposed to remote to also have the ability to put trackers into hailstow. And then finally, it's so important to have what we call this one button hailstow functionality. So some trackers out there, you have to log into each tracker controller unit, basically each box that controls like a subarray of trackers, to put them into hailstow. And that's just not effective for hailstow on large utility scale projects. It takes too long to go to each one of those tracker controller units. So it's so important to have a one button hailstow function. And if you don't have that on your tracker already, you should definitely talk to your tracker company about doing a software upgrade, or talk to your SCADA system provider or your software people about implementing a one button hailstow function. So we have seen that sort of custom IT work done on at least one project, and it's not hard. Number 7, I already talked about selecting trackers that can withstand maximum wind speeds while in hailstow, so I won't go into a lot of detail about that, but that is really important. We do recommend prioritizing hail over wind. This is a controversial perspective, but from what we've seen, we see a lot more damage from hail than from wind. A lot more damage, except for during tornadoes. And tornadoes, you can't do anything about. You can't preserve a project. If you have a tornado that comes through there, there's nothing you can really do about it. But for windstorms, we typically just see damage around the edges of the projects, the first few rows, and oftentimes the corner of a project that is exposed that's directly facing the prevailing wind, the windward side, and that's it. But for hail, we've done a bunch of forensic investigations of hailstorms, and the hail will just take out a large portion of the project. On average, half the project is what we see. And so in our opinion, it is better to put trackers into hailstow and prioritize hailstow over windstow, particularly for those trackers that are go into a flat windstow position. Have backup or continuous power. So some trackers come with backup or continuous power automatically. Others don't, but it's not hard to achieve that. So you can just add a backup generator or a BESS system, like a small BESS system in the project substation that will power the trackers for the entire project to enable them to go into hailstow if there's a grid outage. So seen that. Overnight protection. So we had people probably know, a lot of people probably have heard about the Fighting Jays project that was decimated by hail back in March of 15. So the worst hailstorm that came through, there were actually two hailstorms that came through on March 15th and March 16th. And the worst storm was at 2:30 in the morning on March 16th that just annihilated Fighting Jays. So it is super important to go into hailstow overnight. Just leave the trackers in hailstow overnight. And yeah, you'll be much better off. And then during construction, so another thing that we've seen is like field techs, construction folks, they're not told to, they're not asked or specified to put the trackers into a hailstow during construction. And so we've seen a number of projects that have been damaged during construction when trackers are not in hailstow. I'm talking about putting trackers into hailstow prior to energization. It's not hard to do. You can't put them into hailstow automatically or on demand or whatnot. So you just have to manually put them into hailstow and lock it in place. So it's a simple thing to do, and it's incredible. Right, great. Oh, the other thing I'll just mention briefly about overnight protection is that a lot of trackers' default position overnight is flat. And so that's not good. So what you need to do is ask your tracker company or specify or tune your trackers to go into hailstow at night as opposed to being in the default flat position. All right, almost done. Pass it over to you, Nicole. So we recommend installing hail sensors at a rate of about 1 per kilometer squared to confirm that hail monitoring is working and for data collection in the case of a loss event. So there are a number of hail sensors out there. There's one from Kisters, which is very good. There's another one from a company called Hail iOS or Helios, and that's offered through our friends at Groundwork. So yeah, definitely want to put hail sensors on site. And then if you do have a hail loss, document it very well. Record all the alerts that came in, the weather data, try to get the tracker angles and the times that everything happened. And this is very useful for warranty claims in case your modules broke with hail that was less than what they were certified to withstand, so less than, say, 25 millimeters or less than 35 millimeters, which would be very unusual, but we have seen instances like that, particularly where there are glass defects. And also for insurance claims, it's great to have like a large body of evidence when you go to the insurance company with your claim. Take photos of the hail. If you're there, if you have people on site, try to get them to get some sample hailstones and put them in a plastic bag and stick them in the freezer. This sounds like it's not very useful. It sounds pretty funny, but it's evidence. You've got a huge hailstone. You got some huge hailstones from your site. Put them in the freezer, and yeah, you can demonstrate that this huge hail happened on your site. And the next thing is have a clear chain of command. So this is something that we're seeing in the industry that's sort of undermining the effectiveness of hailstow from, like, I would say more frequently than we like. It's kind of like nobody is sure who should actually make the decision to put the trackers into hailstow. And we want to avoid that. You want just a clear chain of command that results in a hailstow trigger very quickly and early and often, as we were talking about before. We want to avoid the problem that we saw with like the BP Horizon disaster, where the people on site knew this was going to happen. They were seeing it happen, but they just didn't have the authorization to actually fix the problem before it just like totally blew up. And we had that huge oil disaster. So don't want to have a situation where the folks who know that there's a hailstorm is coming can't put the trackers into hailstow because they need authorization from somebody who might be asleep somewhere. Not available. And then finally, test regularly. So I can't emphasize the importance of this enough. These systems they are relatively new. The tracker hail monitoring and stow systems, they've only been around for a few years, even though hail monitoring has been around for many, many years. And so it's a tried and true technology, but putting all the pieces together into a hail monitoring and tracker stow protocol and system that functions reliably, that's a pretty new thing that we've only seen come around within the last couple of years, and they're fallible. Little things can break down. Like, for instance, somebody could forget to pay the bill to the hail monitoring company, so you don't get hail alerts. There could have been some software upgrade that reduces the functionality or whatnot. So we recommend testing definitely before each hail season. Hail seasons typically start in April. Some areas have two hail seasons. One of this goes from April through the summer, and then another one that sort of bumps up around fall. So definitely test before the hail season, and we recommend monthly. And a lot of times we do get pushback on the monthly testing recommendation because people think that, oh, that's kind of a pain. It's going to reduce the energy production, but we think it's well worth it. And you can do it early in the morning or at the end of the day when there's not a lot of solar production anyway. It just takes like half an hour, 15 minutes, if that. Just want to make sure that thing is functioning. And then finally, as I mentioned, software appears to be one of the key sort of sources of failure for these things. So definitely want to make sure that it's tested after any sort of like changes to the software or software upgrades. All right, great. Well, let's move on to the next section.
John, do you want to pause for questions here? I think you have a few.
Oh, sure. Oh, yeah. I'm sorry.
Oh, you're good.
Thank you.
Can you see them, or do you want me to read them off?
Oh, yeah, go ahead. Yeah, I've been watching them, but for some reason they didn't show up.
First one I see is, are the hail risk GIS data available for free, or is there a monthly or yearly subscription fee?
We do sell those. It is a reasonable upfront fee and yearly subscription fee. Yeah, so not expensive. But we sell those.
And then the next one from Matthew says, does an automated hail stow triggered by on-site hail sensors serve any value, or will this be too slow to prevent damage? I think John and I are aligned here that this would probably be too slow to prevent damage after hail's already falling. These hailstorms happen quite quickly, and then getting your trackers into a stow position takes, at least a couple minutes. So you definitely want to have it triggered. Yeah. Anything to add, John?
No, you nailed it.
Yes. Great. And then David is asking, can you describe some of the diligence you ran for forecasting providers?
Sure. Yeah. So what we've done is when a forecasting provider comes to us and asks us to do diligence on their system, and we've done this for DTN. We also did it recently for Bisala. I'm recalling. We basically we'll set up essentially like a virtual project or a real project, and we'll get data from them, and then we will compare it to data that we get from the National Weather Service's NextRad radar system, and essentially look at the timing of the weather service forecast providers' alerts versus what we see from the NextRad National Weather Service radar system. And actually, I sort of misspoke. We won't do it just for one project location. We'll do it for a whole region. So that gives us the ability to see a lot more examples of hailstorms. Right.
And I think that was the last one.
Okay, wonderful. Great. Thank you so much. All right, so let me hand it over to you, Nicole. Yeah. What sort of losses are we seeing?
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier that KWH has a really extensive loss database. So we have about $100 billion worth of assets and $1.5 billion worth of losses in this database that we've been collecting. And this includes zero loss events as well. And so we've seen losses for PV across the US, kind of demoed by that map in the upper right. I know it's a little bit small, but we've seen losses in all 50 states from various perils. And we have data on each of these perils: hail, fire, hurricane, severe convective storm, wind and tornado, flood, and earthquake. So we feel like we have a really nice view of what losses or what perils or issues are driving property damage in the PV industry as a whole. And to John's point earlier, when you're talking about wind stow versus hail stow, if you look at these pie charts, severe convective storm wind losses, including tornado, from our loss database only accounts for about 4% of losses by dollar amount, compared to hail losses, which are 73% of losses by dollar amount, but only 6% of losses by count. So we do see wind losses a little bit more frequently. They're at 10%-ish, but the hail losses are much larger and much more impactful. And that's why we all have this focus on hail, and we're having discussions such as this.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
How do you know how far back does your data set go? Oh yeah, 2012.
Yep. We have data from back in 2012 and then losses as recent as this year in this database as well.
Wow. And may I ask how do you get this data typically?
Yeah, so we get it through a variety of sources. Like I mentioned earlier, KWH started off as a data company, and so we've collected a lot of data through some of our early projects and some of our other insurance products, like our solar revenue put, which is insuring for production. But we've also curated a lot of relationships with asset owners. And then we also get information on property losses, specifically through submissions as well, or property
Interesting.
insurance submissions.
Wow.
So you get a nice
Interesting.
history of the assets.
Yeah, that sounds like a really valuable data set. All
Yeah, so we,
right. Whoop.
let's go
Um,
ahead.
yeah, yeah. What about the physics of hailstow?
Yeah, I can jump into this a little bit. So, uh, as far as the physics and resiliency of PV modules for in the face of hail, like John mentioned earlier, there's a combination of factors at play. There's your module selection, where you can see the glass thickness and the heat treatment and the module construction in general play a huge part in the module's resiliency to hail. And that's demonstrated. John mentioned the 2x factor earlier. That's demonstrated by this RETC plot from their solar risk assessment in 2023, where you can see the 2 millimeter glass is about 2 times more likely to have glass breakage at the same kinetic energy as 3.2 millimeter glass modules. And again, that's due to 2 millimeter glass typically isn't tempered fully, it's just heat strengthened, and the 3.2 millimeter glass is fully tempered. So you get this added strength benefit to it. And then the second component of, or the second primary component of resiliency in the face of hail is stow, like John mentioned earlier as well, where you're tilting the panels so that they don't have as direct of an impact of hail. It's more of a glancing blow. And so you can use a simple physics-based model to kind of estimate the impact of the stow angle on the kinetic energy that's normal to the module, or the kinetic energy is imparted in the normal plane to the module. And you can see that you'll have more of a glancing blow as your module is tilted further, closer and closer to vertical. And you can represent that by this physics equation where you have this cosine type modifier to the kinetic energy off of the hail as it's falling from the sky. So you can model things like this, and we could take it one step further, and we did take it one step further. We took this physics-based model and translated it to the probability of module breakage. If you want to show the next slide, John.
Sure.
And so this, we'll want to take, these aren't perfect curves. We correct them with our loss database and what we see in there. So we correct this physics-based model with losses from the real world. So take them with a grain of salt, but it gives you an idea of the magnitude the effect of stow can really have on these projects. So the chart on the left is the probability of breakage for 2 millimeter glass modules in 40-mile-per-hour winds, and the chart on the right is that same probability of breakage for 3.2 millimeter glass modules. And so a couple things you can notice in these curves, the 3.2 millimeter glass modules have drastically lower probabilities of breakage compared to the 2 millimeter glass modules. So that's that 2x factor that was mentioned earlier. They're just more resilient modules. And then you also see a drastic impact of stow angle on the probability of module survival as you go from 0 degree stow at the top, which would be the highest likelihood of damage, down to these higher degree tilts like 60, 75, 77 degrees, where you have a much lower probability of damage. So these are just the curves. You can see clearly that stow reduces the probability of glass breakage during a hailstorm. These are just the curves in the ideal situation where your modules are facing
Hmm. What if we lost Nicole, or if, yeah, we lost Nicole. Okay, hopefully she'll come back. Thanks, Mike. Yeah, but I'm not present. Okay, so, oh, too bad we lost Nicole. Hopefully she'll come back. All right, well, let me keep going. Yeah, thanks, Alfonso. So we do have some questions. Great, thanks, Alfonso. You can hear me. Okay, so we do have some questions. Let me address those questions while hopefully Nicole comes back. So the first question is from Matthew Durrett, and Matthew asks, please clarify if hailstow means the tracker is facing east, or if the tracker is facing away from the prevailing wind as measured on site, or if it is facing away from the direction of the storm that the storm is traveling. If this is variable, how can this be done at night? Yeah, it's a great question. So I think Nicole was going to get to this, but we haven't figured out a good way to predict the direction of wind when hail actually falls. It's a super chaotic environment, and oftentimes the wind will change in direction compared to what's called the prevailing wind, or prevailing direction of the wind, which is consistent with the prevailing direction of the storm. Um, so storms in the continental United States, they typically come from west and go east. Oftentimes we see them coming from the northwest and going southeast. And then what we'll see using on-site anemometers is we'll see, as I mentioned, a change in the wind direction. And oftentimes the wind will change from coming from the west to coming from the north, which is great actually, because it reduces the impact angle, because trackers have a north-south axis. So what we are recommending is that we've talked to meteorologists about this. We have a meteorologist on staff as well. We do recommend that modules be faced east if the trackers have the capability of withstanding wind facing east, just because that's the direction that the prevailing storm comes from typically. And as I was showing in this, show this chart, there is a benefit of facing the modules away from the wind. However, there are some trackers that have to face west, and so in those cases, yeah, they should go into hailstow in the west. So yeah, it's definitely an area of research, understanding the optimal direction and understanding the direction of
Hey folks, apologies for that. I guess my internet decided to cut out. We are having a rainstorm.
Oh yeah, no, oh no worries, no worries. I'm glad you're back. So I was just taking a question. So let's get back to
great.
your. Yeah,
well, it sounds like it was on theme about stowing away from the wind versus into the wind. So
yeah. And in fact, maybe we should just take this opportunity to answer some more questions.
Yeah, if there's any in the chat.
Yeah. So another one is, let's see here. How has the loss data changed over the past 10 years? This one can be for you, Nicole, if you can. Can you identify if hail damage has been increasing and why? Weaker module designs, increasing hail sizes due to climate change, greater volume of projects in hail-prone areas? Do you have any thoughts on that, Nicole?
Yeah, I would say we do see more losses in more recent years just because of more PV assets being built in hail-prone regions. So that trend is definitely verified. And we definitely see the difference between 2 mm glass and 3.2 mm glass in our loss database as well. So I think all of those factors that you're mentioning, the weaker module designs, increasing sites in these hail-prone regions. I'm not sure that we completely pick up the increasing hail sizes due to climate change. There's other factors of just having more PV in hail-prone regions and having thinner glass out in the fields, at least for a time. Those are much more driving factors of what we're seeing in our loss database.
Great. Yeah, according to our meteorologists, we don't yet have a signal in the data suggesting we're seeing more hail or larger hail due to climate change yet, but models do suggest we are going to see larger hail in some areas and more hail in other areas, like into the upper Midwest and Northeast, unfortunately, due to climate change. Got another question here from Todd Ganshaw. Regarding module selection, does the type of backside or rear side construction play a role, glass versus backsheet? Any thoughts on that, Cole?
Yeah, definitely. So when we're looking at 2 mm glass, the two typical constructions we've seen so far: 2 mm glass, 2 mm glass, and then 3.2 mm with a polymer backsheet. Interestingly, the 2 mm is less prone to having micro cracks in these modules because of the symmetry of the system. You have glass on either side. The 3.2 mm glass, however, is more likely to not have glass cracks because of the thicker glass. We also see a new construction emerging that's 3.2 mm glass on the front and the 2 mm glass on the back. And preliminary results are showing that these modules are actually much more resilient to hail damage and glass breakage than even the 3.2 mm with a polymer backsheet. So we'll have to get more results, more testing data on that construction, 3.2 mm glass with 2 mm glass backsheet. But it's looking promising that could be another hail resilient module.
Great. Got a couple more questions on this topic. So another question from Ian Gregory. Hi, Ian. Great to see that you're out there. How do you ensure hail testing on modules is realistic? I've heard that real hail is not always perfectly round, like that used in lab testing. It's so true. Yeah, it's a real challenge, and we haven't exactly figured out how to do testing that fully simulates a hailstorm. However, we have developed a new, what we call hail resiliency curve test with our sister company, RETC, that attempts to do that much better than the typical hail test that's done with the IEC 61215 standard. So the IEC 61215 standard, it just requires like a couple modules and 11 hail impact tests, and it's not a test to failure. So if the modules pass at 25 millimeters or say 35 millimeters, then they get this certification. And unfortunately, we're a couple things. One is we're seeing much larger hail. We regularly see hail that's 55, 65, even 70 millimeters or greater. So the IEC test isn't good enough, even though you could, test using IEC standards, the IEC standard at larger hail sizes or freezer ice ball sizes that's what they use for test projectiles. We just don't see that. And the other problem is that there's just not enough data from 11 or even 22 impacts to really understand what the probability of glass breakage is throughout the range of impact energies or hailstone sizes that we actually see in nature. And so this hail resiliency curve test that we're doing now, it takes a pallet of modules, so 25 to 30 modules, really at least 25 modules. And then we shoot freezer ice balls, which granted are not spiky like real hail. They are spherical. But we shoot freezer ice balls at increasing freezer ice ball sizes at increasing velocities to really represent the full range of impact energies that we would see in a storm. And we do that around the center region. We do that around the perimeter regions for this whole palette of modules that incidentally is randomly selected. And so with that, we have enough data to draw out these hail resiliency curves that we're showing here that Nicole was talking about, just using sufficient data. We have like hundreds of ones. These are test to failures, as I think I mentioned. So the goal is to get those modules to actually break, to understand when they will actually break. Then the last question I'll note right now is from Becca Emery. John, you mentioned 3.2 millimeter heat tempered glass. Is there a weight at which the benefits decline or the overall weight becomes a disadvantage? Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. So that one of the main reasons we have 2 millimeter glass is to reduce weight. These are big modules, big floppy modules as they're called, and they can't be too heavy for people to lift, or too heavy to not fit all into a shipping container. You can only fit so many modules into a shipping container, and then you have the shipping container with a lot of space, and you need another shipping container, so it's very expensive. And so, yeah, it's definitely a consideration. I would say that there's not there probably is a weight where it becomes a disadvantage, but I don't know what it is. I know for people actually putting modules in place, you're not allowed to lift more than 50 pounds per person per OSHA standard. So that's one limit, but that's not economic in nature. That's a safety limit. So can't exactly answer your question, but yeah, there probably is an economic limit as well to weight.
Well, and I
All
think
right,
there's
back to you, Nicole. Yeah, go
considerations
ahead.
on the weight side. I think there's considerations too with the big floppy modules. As we get heavier and heavier modules, you start to see them almost deform under their own weight, and so then that brings into questions. They start to bend around the torque tubes. You want to make sure that your frame is able to prevent that, or your module construction as a whole is just able to prevent that.
That's a really
But
good
yeah,
point.
in the
Yeah.
nature of this, let's keep moving through.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is just the same set of slides or the same set of curves. We don't need to spend too much time here, but it shows kind of the drastic impact that facing into the wind can have on your probability of module survival. So you have to consider this situation just because of the complex severe convective storm dynamics. Ideally, you stow away from the wind, but this set of curves indicates that you really see the benefit of these higher degree tilts, and the combination of a really high degree tilt with 3.2 millimeter glass modules when you're in the situation where you're tilting into the wind. So that would be the recommendation. The ideal scenario is use both mitigating factors.
Great. So Nicole, I know that you did some research on looking at the impact of energy production during stow. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, I could definitely talk about that really quickly. This was a study that we did back in 2023 when we were hearing some of these concerns around the production impacts of going into stow that John mentioned earlier, where folks were not stowing early and stowing often. They were stowing a little bit later because we wanted to get as much production as possible. So we did a simulation case study on a large site in Texas that was stowing very conservatively or aggressively, whichever you want to think about it, very often. The site was stowing for every hail warning, watch, or advisory within the same county. So it wasn't using any localized hail alerts or anything like this. We were just simulating if there was a warning, watch, or advisory from the National Weather Service in the area, assume the site went into stow for every single one of those. What were the actual production impacts? And what we found is that the impacts were only 0.1% of production, and that those impacts were greatly outweighed by just the effect of clouds. So this just kind of backs up the idea that, well, if you're going into stow preemptively for a hailstorm, it's very likely to be cloudy out. You don't have much irradiance anyways, so you're not losing too much production by going into stow as well. And this was validated by some assets out in the field as well. I think John mentioned that earlier, that they also saw production impacts when they were stowing early, stowing often, of around that 0.1%.
Excellent. Thank you so much for doing the study, by the way. This has been great so many times.
Yeah, it's a good one. I might need to do another one on the testing monthly impacts on production, to your point earlier.
Ooh, I like that. I like that idea. Okay, so this is the billion-dollar, multi-million-dollar, maybe billion-dollar question. Are we seeing insurance providers give credit for hail stow?
Yeah, great question. I think we're moving towards that. So, just to give a little bit of a history of the insurance industry for renewables, in 2019, there was really abundant insurance. There were great rates. Then in 2019 to 2023, this is when we started to see some of these very large losses. As around when like Midway happened, we saw outsized natural catastrophe losses. And then we had capacity kind of leaving the market and driving up premiums as a whole. Now, moving forward, we're trying to focus on risk selection and a more data-driven approach to insurance, or what we're calling smart coverage, where premiums and coverage is differentiated by some of these site design elements, such as hail, stow, and module selection, so that underwriters can really underwrite for resiliency. So if you want to go to the next slide, I could talk a little bit about what I mean in a little bit more detail too. So here I'm kind of showing what this might look like for taking site-specific characteristics into account. So we don't just want these site-specific characteristics to be taken into account by the underwriter's judgment. We also want them to feed into the natural catastrophe modeling, which is a major tool that underwriters use in order to come up with the policy premium and terms. So NatCat modeling will spit out an average annual loss, that's basically what the underwriters are using to size the premiums. So we want to incorporate site-specific characteristics, again, things like module selection, your stow protocols, elevation of your assets. We want to be able to incorporate those characteristics into that derivation of the average annual losses that the underwriters are looking at, so that they can accurately adjust policy premiums and terms to account for these site-specific characteristics. And this is something that the industry as a whole is generally moving towards, being able to take into account these site-specific characteristics in the NatCat modeling and in the underwriter's judgment. It historically hasn't been incorporated into natural catastrophe modeling. And so really quickly to show a little bit more detail of how you can take into account these site characteristics in the natural catastrophe modeling, in that framework that gives you the average annual losses that the underwriters are looking at. These damage ratio curves are one of the core components of natural catastrophe modeling that essentially describe the asset's response to an event. So for example, what percent of damage would you expect at a PV site in a hailstorm with 3-inch hail? That is the type of data point that the damage ratio curve would describe. And so one way that you can adjust that natural catastrophe modeling that the underwriters are using, or ultimately adjust that average annual loss that then goes into your premiums, you can adjust this damage ratio curve based off of site-specific resiliency factors. And so we can take that physics-based model that I showed earlier in combination with our loss database and get adjustments to this damage ratio curve so that a 2mm glass module could be represented by this dotted line above, which essentially predicts higher damages at smaller sizes of hail than a 3.2mm glass module, which is that middle dashed curve. And then you get even an added benefit of having a stow program in place where you even have lower predicted damages in this damage ratio curve, which leads to lower average annual losses that are predicted for that site, which leads to the underwriters having the information they need to have lower premiums. So this site-specific resiliency factors should directly influence the modeling, and that should directly impact the premium so that resiliency is rewarded.
It's really interesting.
And this is just really quickly a case study of this in action, where we wrote a site in Texas. It was in a very hail exposed region. We were able to verify these resiliency measures, the hail stow, the history of stowing for past events. We were able to incorporate that within our modeling, and it showed a 72% deviation in their natural catastrophe insurance rate. So these adjustments to the damage ratio curve that I'm talking about, they're not just minor adjustments that are only impacting it a little bit. These are drastic things that, stowing drastically improves your site's resiliency to hail, so it should drastically reduce your property insurance premium.
That's great. We have 1 minute left.
Yeah.
Can you talk about the form?
I'll talk about the form.
Our beautiful form.
Yep. VDE and KWH developed this together with a lot of input from the tracker manufacturers. One of these issues that we're running into in the insurance industry when we want to reward resiliency is that this information isn't always flowing back to us so that we can adjust premiums based off of. So things, all the best practices that John mentioned earlier, we want to make sure that the insurance community knows about those for assets so that they can reward those resilient behaviors. And this does include a checkbox waiver. So if an asset doesn't want to fill out all 3 pages of this form with all of their resiliency information, they can just hit this checkbox that allows us to reach out directly to racking manufacturers or third-party evaluators in order to get this information. So we're trying to make it very easy for this information to flow through the industry to insurers.
Great. And this is free from both of our websites.
Yes, this is
okay.
Free.
Let's do the takeaways, and then we'll go into QA for people who could stay longer.
Yeah, these are redundant with what you were saying earlier, but if you're an operating asset, make sure you're implementing a really robust hail stow protocol. You're testing that hail stow protocol end to end, which will test everything, catch all those issues, and then make sure that that gets communicated with your insurers through venues or tools like our hail and stow and risk evaluation form.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Nicole. Wonderful. Yeah. Okay, let's, if people can stay on, let's stay on for another 5 minutes. Nicole, could you stay on for another 5 minutes to answer some questions?
Yeah,
okay,
yep.
Great. Let's take a look at the Q&A. All right. So we've got a question from Alfonso Tovar. John, Nicole, in your experience, what is the extent of preemptive stow adoption in the industry? Nicole, do you have a perspective on that?
We are seeing more of that stow early, stow often mentality getting adopted. I'm hearing it at a lot of these conferences and venues and from asset owners. We see it come in through our submissions with when we do get the information on these assets that are paying attention to their hail risk and do have a really robust stow protocol, we are seeing good adoption, but there's still, of course, there's a wide range of adoption of stow early, stow often, I'd say. Wide range of hail stow protocols that we see come through in our submissions, but we're always happy to provide feedback on those as well.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it's funny because sometimes I've seen operators say that they do have a protocol, but it's just not tested properly or it's not tested regularly. So I kind of wonder, like, okay, they have a protocol in place, but is it really working? Are people really trained?
Right. Or to your point earlier, they have a protocol in place, but they don't have trackers that are able to be in this hail stow angle at high wind speeds. So it's tough.
Yeah. Ian Gregory asks, what are your recommendations for fixed tilt systems? Yeah, great question. Nicole, do you have a perspective on that?
I think at that point, the most important thing you can do is have thick glass. So, or have some of these hail resilient modules. So ideally you'd have 3.2 millimeter.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Yeah. In fact, NREL is doing the study. They recently published the first part of the study that looked at the a storm that I think went through Austin, Texas, a hailstorm that went through Austin, Texas, and broke a lot of modules on people's rooftops. And they showed that the newer modules with the thinner glass didn't fare as well as you'd expect with the older vintage modules that have thicker glass, up to 4 millimeter glass, actually, for older vintage modules on rooftop systems. Got a question from Benjamin Miller. Nicole, do the hail resiliency curve test results factor into your underwriting, or are you more concerned with glass size as a predictor of variable? Thanks, Alfonso.
The hail resiliency curves, and apologies, I can't see the questions, but the probability of breakage curves that I was showing earlier, we do factor those into our model. So that's a basis of our vulnerability curve adjustments. So we do adjust our natural catastrophe modeling for both glass thickness as well as stow, not just stow angle, but also the confidence that we have in the asset getting to that stow angle when hail shows up. So that's a whole host of things that John was mentioning earlier. If they are testing their stow protocols monthly successfully, that leads to a higher confidence in stow. That goes directly into our modeling.
Yeah. And I'll just add to that. So we use categories of hail resiliency right now that are based on the module glass construction, but not the individual module bill of materials. Like we have 2 millimeter glass, 3.2 millimeter front glass polymer backsheet for solar, so forth. So with this hail resiliency curve test that I was talking about before, we will be able to you have bomb specific, module specific hail resiliency curves.
And when that data is available to us, sorry, I didn't realize we were talking about the specific. When that data is available to us, we will take that into account in our modeling as well.
That's great. Yeah, so got a question in the chat from Todd Ganshaw. Is there a way to estimate or determine max wind speed during a hail event for a particular location? Wondering for tracker selection considerations. Should this be a concern? I can take that one if you want. We can provide that.
Go ahead.
So yeah, so it's hard to do because the radar data that we get doesn't include wind speed. It includes an estimate of the hail size, and then so what we do is we find wind speed data that is relatively close to a project location from a met station that's usually at an airport. There's a infrastructure of publicly funded met stations called the ASOS system. And so we will get maximum wind speed during the time of a hailstorm that we see in radar. And then we're able to understand the co-occurrence of wind speed with hail for that location. But it's not a perfect fit, but it's a pretty good estimate. Any more questions? I'm just looking around at chat, QA. I think oh, here's another one. From Irina Bennert. What about solar farms situated in EQ-prone regions like California? Would you recommend thinner glass to reduce the weight? Do you have mitigation strategies for California? Cole, do you have a thought on that?
We haven't seen many earthquake losses at all in our loss database. So I would be much more concerned about hail, but I guess in California, I guess whichever makes the most sense. I wouldn't say, I don't have experience around whether thinner glass or thicker glass would fare better in an earthquake. So far, we haven't seen really losses from earthquakes come through in any significant amount. So I'm not sure we have enough of a signal to make a recommendation one way or the other.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I think the biggest thing, mitigation strategies for California, the biggest peril to be concerned about would be fire. So PV sites are prone to have brush fires. That we do see a significant number of losses from in our loss database. And for that, you want to make sure that you're doing your vegetation management appropriately. You have plans with the local fire department so that they know they can spray water on the panels or water near the site. All of those things to prevent having fires would be the major thing in California.
That makes sense. I only know of one instance where there was an earthquake, a major earthquake with a utility scale, semi-utility scale project. It was the Napa Valley College. And Napa had an earthquake a few years ago. They have a ground-mounted system, and I had the ability to look at the effects of that, and there was no effect of the earthquake, so there was no damage. So I think that what I've heard is that the seismic standards are effective in preventing damage from earthquakes. Solar systems. Okay, great. Thank you so much. Oh, we do have one more new post. Let's see here. And again from Irina, have you seen claims triggered by smoke deposited on the glass after a wildfire, a reduction in production? See anything like that, Nicole?
I was on mute. So on the property insurance side, we wouldn't have coverage for that if it didn't come with any physical damage. So that would be more on our production insurance side where that may or may not be covered. If you reach out to me, I can get you a better answer for that, but I'm much more on the property insurance side.
Great. Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Nicole, and thank you everyone for joining. This has been a real pleasure and a real honor. So yeah, please feel free to get in touch with either of us. Here's our contact information. Yeah, we're here to serve you, and go solar. Thanks, everyone.
Go solar. Bye. Thanks.